Hello, this is Pastor Peter Pettit from St. Paul Lutheran Church, together with
Pastor Kendra Thompson.
And we are back for the 7th session of discussing Tish Harrison Warren's book, Liturgy of the Ordinary. This started as a Lenten study for us. We were going to do 5 sessions. And with the way things have turned out with our physical distancing and not being able to gather together, we are going to be continuing until we finish Warren's book. It should be the first week in May that we do this. It's been a great read, hasn't it, Kendra?
Yes, and fun to read it in dialogue with you and others.
Indeed. We appreciate those who've been responding to us, who've been sending email comments, or we've had a chance to talk with about it. And hope that you're finding some people to talk with about it as well. This chapter called Sitting in Traffic, chapter 8, about liturgical time and the unhurried God, but honestly, sitting in traffic feels an awful lot like what we're doing right now, doesn't it?
We're all parked.
Yeah, I'm parked here, you're parked there.
Yeah.
And the whole question of what we do with that kind of time when we're not able to gather as we normally can, when we're waiting for things to start up again, when so much of our life has been suspended or put on hold in a sense. All the familiar things have been held up for the time, and here we are waiting.
Well, it can feel very inactive. So I like that we have this chapter and Tish Warren to point us towards the usefulness of this time, because sometimes it can be hard to see what is God doing in this moment when it feels just slowed to a halt. So I actually have a quote I'd like to read. If you want to find this in your book, it comes on page 103, where Tish writes, "For the good of my own soul, I need to feel what it's like to wait, to let the moments march past. And here I am, plunged into an ancient spiritual practice in the middle of the freeway, forced against my will to practice waiting."
I was a little slower on getting the quote up, but there it is.
We can wait.
It's a good thing. Yeah. Yeah, this sense that of waiting, and I love when she goes on and says, "How can I live as one who watches and waits for the coming kingdom when I can barely wait for water to boil?"
Yes.
This sense that waiting is really, and it's just an interruption. It's just an intrusion. It's an inconvenience. It's a waste of time. She likens it to sitting in traffic on the I-35.
Which I have done.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, we lived in Austin, Texas, and there are times driving home during rush hour, you just sit there. And, maybe it's better now, maybe it's worse, but I have experienced that in Texas on I-35.
Yeah.
Not with children. That, I think she gets the gold star for that. I haven't experienced it with children in the back seat.
Indeed. Well, and if we feel that waiting is an imposition on us, an interruption, then it has one feel about it. If we receive waiting as a gift, it kind of invites us to new insights. I think that's part of what Warren is talking about. Now, I read recently on a website called Forge, a piece by Julio Vincent Gambudo, in which he talks about this present time in which we're waiting and the way in which we're waiting for normal to come back. And he really cautions against wanting that normal to come back too quickly, and actually suggests that there are forces within our society which will push us to just get back to normal, just like it was, no different than it was. And Gambudo says, we really have a chance here to learn something about ourselves, our society, what's important to us, and to use this time of waiting to think about how we want to emerge from it perhaps differently, not just back to normal, but into some new ways.
You know, Peter, before we move on to our questions, that made me think of, I was an undergrad when 9/11 happened.
Oh.
And, you know, I went to class that day, and I had at least 2 professors who just suspended class and said, we're just going to talk about this. And in my Intro to Teaching Literary Arts class, one of the students said, well, we're just going to get over this, and we're going to work through this, and we're going to be fine. And the teacher very graciously nodded her head and said, and that is a very American way to grieve. And I'll never forget her saying that. You know, we're so ready to get to the end, the other side of our grief, the other side of the unknown. And what about this time where we're waiting, where we're sitting with this? You know, I mean, we just celebrated Easter, but we had to sit, you know, we grieved on Friday, and then Saturday is just this waiting.
Right.
This is a part of our liturgical process, that there are these seasons of waiting.
And God takes time. So if we don't take with God, then we're focused on something else. You lifted up the image of Gulliver's Travels that
Yes.
That Warren uses in this chapter, where the Lilliputians thought that since Gulliver checked his watch so often, he's always checking his watch and wondering what time it is, well, his watch must be his God. And indeed, if we're focused on the normal that our life has been, and rushing and trying to get back to that, then evidently there's something in that which is the most important thing for us. And it's not to say that we won't have to get back to the things that are important to us in that. But Gambudo, and I think Warren as well, would say, just don't miss what this time of waiting can teach us about ourselves and invite us to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have an invitation for you. We have some questions for you to consider. So take a minute. You can pause this video, talk to the person next to you, or just reflect on these. But what does the time of waiting help us to see and to understand about ourselves and the world? And what are the pressures that will work against recalibrating our lives to those insights after we're done with this time of waiting? So take a minute. Hopefully you've had a chance to reflect on those questions, because we're going to move on to this sense of looking at waiting from God's perspective.
Let's go back to the next quote from Warren from her book. She talks about the way in which she discovered a different sense of waiting. Kendra?
So discovering the liturgical calendar felt like discovering real time. It gave a transcendent shape to my life. Time was no longer arbitrary, an academic calendar, a marketing play, or a back-to-school sale, a Labor Day blowout, a national holiday, a sports season. Time had shape and meaning. All of a sudden, time was a story, and I could live in a story.
For those who may not be familiar with liturgical time, that wheel on the left side of the screen there, it represents the cycle of a full year. The purple band at about 11 o'clock would be the beginning of the liturgical year, the church year, which is the season of Advent, 4 weeks before Christmas. And then you move clockwise around the wheel. We're currently in the white band at about 3:30 or 4 o'clock there, which is the 50 days of Easter, and soon to be followed by a return to what some people call ordinary time, or we more often call Pentecost, in that large green half of the year that's on the left side there. This is the story that moves from Jesus' birth through his appearance to the world, his revelation to the world, and then into the Lenten season with his move back toward Jerusalem, his suffering and passion and death on Good Friday, the resurrection on Easter, and then eventually his ascension into heaven on 40 days after Easter, and the giving of the Holy Spirit to the church on the day of Pentecost, which begins that long green season of Pentecost. That is the story that Warren is referring to in the liturgical calendar, as the first half of which is really the story of Jesus' life, and the second half of it is the story of the life of the church.
Thank you for that. That's helpful, Peter.
Sure. One of the things that strikes me, though, about what Warren says is that for her, this gave her a sense that time got a structure and it became part of the story. I would ask whether the church is the only place that gives a story in the time that it offers. I think those marketers offer us a story as well. You're suffering, you have a problem. My product can solve it for you, and your life goes on happily. I think sports seasons tell a story. I think the academic world has its own story about that goes with its structuring of time. So for me, it's not so much that the church has a story and nobody else does. I think it has more to do with whose story are we choosing to live?
Right. Yeah. And that's going to alter how we embrace time, how we see it. Is it our enemy, or is it a tool for deepening faith?
Yeah, indeed. There's this quote from Hans Urs von Balthasar in Warren's chapter that patience is the basic constituent of Christianity.
I love that. Yeah.
That we should live with the meekness of the Lamb who is led. I wondered whether that ties in somewhat to Jesus saying that you must accept the kingdom as a little child. You know, little children want things now. They want it absolutely. They want it their way. They want it now, and they get it the way it can be offered to them, and they have to receive it with a certain amount of patience and being led into life more than just charging in as they would choose to. I see some connections there.
Yeah. I also thought of this Psalm 27.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just read a little bit of it.
I think we have that too. There we go.
The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? I believe that I shall see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. In this scripture, we see waiting as an invitation, an opportunity. That waiting reorients us to live a life that is not in fear, but that anticipates God is up to something good in our lives and in the world.
Warren talks about, in terms of being able to accept life, time as something into which we are swept up.
Yeah.
And it seems to me it's one thing if you're waiting with no clear sense of why or where you're going, there's almost a dread about it. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you have a sense of being swept up in something that's carrying you along, it's
an adventure.
More an adventure, right? You're going somewhere. So Warren says, time is a stream we are swept into. Time is not a commodity that I control, manage, or consume. Time revolves around God. What God has done, what God is doing, and what God will do. That's on page 108 in Warren's book. So that leads us then to our next set of questions, how it feels to think about our life story as not in our own control. Is there something that feels irresponsible about that? And what does that say about our sense of responsibility? But then also, we all have a sense that getting a terminal illness timeline, the dreaded You have 6 months to live. God forbid. But getting that timeline would focus our lives. We know stories of people for whom that's been true. What about the other way? Would focusing our lives on a particular end, a goal, a sense of where it is that we're going, help us to feel fulfillment in every day? Those are our questions for the second segment. Go ahead and hit pause, and we will continue after you've had a chance to reflect on this or discuss this with our last segment.
Next, we can move on to thinking about waiting as preparation. You know, we glimpsed that liturgical calendar, the wheel, and for those two major festivals in the church year, we have these seasons of preparation, so that our waiting is not just sitting passively, but that there's a purpose to it. So, so we're going to talk a little bit about waiting as this season of preparedness or preparation.
Yeah. Again, back to Warren, this one on pages 112, 113. We live in a brutal world, but in the life of Christ and the work of the Holy Spirit, that story of liturgical time, we glimpse redemption and participate in it. We have a telos as we wait, an ultimate purpose and aim. Telos is the Greek word that gets used for an ultimate purpose and aim. Our hope for a future of shalom, wholeness, motivates us to press toward that reality, even in our ordinary days. So Warren suggests we're never quite comfortable. We seek justice, practice mercy, and herald the coming kingdom. The idea is that if we don't know what we're waiting for, we just hang out. But when we have a sense that there is a future that's being shaped into which we're moving and for which we're waiting, then the waiting time becomes the preparation to participate and celebrate in what we're waiting for. Mm-hmm. There's the biblical image that Warren uses of shalom, or if we think about the prophetic images of justice flowing down like water and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream, these are the images of the reality in which we should live, because it's the reality of a future rather than only the images and distractions and multiple confusions of the present. You had mentioned a scene in a movie, Labyrinth.
Yeah, so one of my favorite movies as a kid and adolescent was Labyrinth, you know, David Bowie and his amazing mullet. But there's this scene where the young woman who's going through the labyrinth, and she's, you know, speaking of time, she's on a time crunch to get to the other side of it, to rescue her baby brother. She encounters this distraction where there's like this mirage. It looks just like her bedroom, and all of her favorite things are in there. And so there's a part of her that just wants to rest in that, you know, to go to sleep, to be surrounded by her favorite things. But she realizes that it's not real. And so she starts crashing down the walls of this mirage that's not really her home. It's not really her bedroom. Wow. And you know, that's such a vivid image. I think we have to do this all the time, you know, and we'll probably have to do it in the near future as forces around us want to say, oh, we're going to get back to normal, and, you know, here's some government compensation to get the economy back on track, and, you know, like everything's going to be fine and back to the way it was. Well, maybe it won't. You know, maybe this is shaping us now. I don't mean that doomsday, but maybe this is shaping us now to look at the world around us in a different way, that we have to leave room for that.
It's not only what we'll do in the future, it's how what we anticipate in the future shapes how we live today. Warren talks about this with her friend Jan, the painter, who painted the picture of the doorway. And as Warren stood in front of it and looked at it, she said, "Oh, I still want to know what's on the other side of that door." And Jan said, "That's how I wanted you to feel."
Yeah.
And Warren realizes that for her, she really wants to get through there. She's impatient to get through the door and see what's there. She said for Jan, who had been through all kinds of difficulties and health issues and all sorts of things in her life, Jan said she had given up on waiting for the gift and realized that waiting is the gift. And that it's in this time that we are gifted to live into the future that is coming. And I did these Lenten devotions this Lenten season, and they were also based on Warren's book. And when I got to this chapter, I thought about this living into the future and was reminded of the great professional golfer Jack Nicklaus, who was asked after he won his last major tournament, was he going to retire? Of course, he didn't know it was his last yet. That only turned out to be the case after a number of years. Was he ready to retire? He said, "When I don't believe I can win anymore, then I will retire." And in fact, he played for a number of more years. He did win after that, no more major tournaments, but he continued to win a bit. Not every tournament, but he anticipated that he could win, and that shaped his day around practice and preparation and tournament golf. And it was when he concluded that his future no longer had winning in it, that he changed how he lived in his days and really became a very prolific golf course architect and designer. So it's a very prosaic example, but I think it's a real one of how what we anticipate is possible or coming in the future shapes how we live today. So I think, for example, for myself, I anticipate one of the joys that I anticipate in the world that God is creating is one in which I'm not as limited by my white male of a certain age, American, of a certain socioeconomic class, like all of that identity stuff that has shaped and limited the way that I look at the world and what I'm able to offer in a relationship. Those things will be less important, and I'll be able to relate to others more for who they are. But I believe that that's part of the wholeness, the shalom, the justice, the faithfulness that God is creating in our future. Then today, I can live the preparation for that by expanding my horizons, by reading Native American tales, by investigating cultures from other places, by reading poetry by African American women, and just expanding my own horizons now so that when that time of shalom comes that I envision as being so richly multicultural and easily navigated by all of us, I will be better prepared for the way that I've spent my time waiting.
I think I'll add to that, this time we could try to manage every moment of it, to just fill it with productivity and to-do lists and things that busy us so that we feel like we're living in the same reality we were a month ago.
Right.
But what I've been trying to embrace is kind of what Tish Warren suggests, is how we let this waiting time shape us, and are there opportunities in it to grow in our faith, to connect with our families, finding ways that it's shaping us. Because in 5 more weeks or however long this continues, I think the gift to those around us is not that frenetic busyness, but that there's something in us that has been shaped and deepened and has grown as a result of this strange time of waiting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we have a few questions for this last segment. Just before we go to those, a reminder, we will be back again next week. We'll be dealing with chapter 9 of Tish Warren's book, chapter 9, Calling a Friend. And we will look forward to being with you for that. We certainly appreciate your engaging in this with us. And we leave you with these couple of questions dealing with the whole issue of waiting and how we wait, and waiting perhaps as preparation. Kendra?
What is the strongest image for you of the future that God is crafting for you? What does your faith lead you to anticipate with the greatest joy? And then what does that image encourage you to do with this gift of time to prepare for it? So take a minute, reflect on those questions, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week when we talk about calling a friend, right? Isn't that the chapter?
Calling a friend. That's
calling
it.
a friend. I think we've been doing a lot of that lately.
Yeah, you think so? That's great. Thanks so much, Kendra. Good to be on this call with you and
yes,
with everyone.
You too. We'll see you next time.